My fellow Nigerians, as your future president, today I want to share my very informed perspectives on the recent new global tariff policy announced by the United States President Donald Trump and how Nigeria should respond to it. I will begin by examining President Trump's reasons for the policy. Then I will talk about the ongoing 90-day pause for all countries except China announced on April 9. Next, I will discuss reactions and concerns from Nigeria, including a reflection on why this opportunity for an overhaul of the global trade system is great for Nigeria and other African countries. Finally, I will conclude with comments on the ongoing US-China trade war and why China should seek a deal as soon as possible. So, the very first thing to note is that President Trump's actions on trade are very popular with most Americans, and especially middle and working class Americans. In fact, a Daily Mail poll from March 31 to April 3 found that Trump's approval rating actually rose after the tariff order was signed and announced. The poll specifically found that more Americans support the policy than oppose it. That isn't surprising considering that even prominent Democrats, including former President Barack Obama, former Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Senators Charles Schumer, and Bernie Sanders have all publicly supported and called for tough tariff actions against China, in particular, over the years and decades. Let's listen to Senator Schumer, for example, because he's the most senior Democrat in the United States government at the moment. In 2011, Senator Schumer said, and I quote, "On issue after issue, Americans have grimaced, shrugged their shoulders, but never done anything effective to, in large measure, stop the Chinese pursuit of unfair mercantilism. The Obama administration must impose duties on Chinese imports to offset or countervail the benefits conferred on foreign producers. We are already in a trade war with China and we are losing." End of quote. In October 2017, in President Trump's first term, Schumer said, and I quote, "President Trump has promised many times to crack down on China. And still, 10 months into his administration, his Commerce Secretary is once again needlessly delaying a preliminary step in that effort. Every time I see Secretary Ross, I say to him, 'When are we going to do something on China?' 'Oh, we're going to do something tough.' And each time there's a different excuse. This should have happened in the first 2 months of the administration. It hasn't. So, because of the Republican inaction on being tough with China, Senate Democrats will be sending a letter to President Trump and Secretary Ross demanding that the administration keep its promise to crack down on China." End of quote. In April 2018, after President Trump finally started taking action on China, Senator Schumer said, and I quote, "I think the president is doing the right thing. China has taken advantage of us for 2 decades. Frankly, I'm closer on this issue with President Trump than I was with Presidents Bush or Obama because they did nothing to tell China off." End of quote. Let's now turn to President Trump. In 1988, during an appearance on the Oprah Winfrey Show, Trump said, and I quote, "We let Japan come in and dump everything right into our markets. It is not free trade. If you ever go to Japan and try to sell something, it's almost impossible. They come over here, they sell their cars, their VCRs. Kuwait, they live like kings, and yet they are not paying tariffs. We make it possible for them to sell their oil. Why aren't they paying us 25% of what they are making?" End of quote. In 1995, speaking again about Japan, Trump said, and I quote, "Keep your cars out of here until you open up. Our leaders are afraid politically to make a tough stand. I would take a much harder stand, make a couple of enemies, but if that happened, we'll be better off." End of quote. In 2012, speaking about what his potential future trade policy, if he ran for president that is, would look like, Trump stated, and I quote, "Somebody said, 'Well, what will you do regarding China?' So easy. I'll drop a 25% tax on China." End of quote. As we all can see, Trump's actions today are products of decades of consistency on this issue. And he's absolutely right. Free and fair trade means that countries cannot have tariffs on goods coming from other countries that they have free access to. Indeed, for those thinking Trump's tariffs have no legal basis, the United States Reciprocal Trade Act H.R. 735 empowers the president to levy reciprocal tariffs against nations exploiting America's open markets. In fact, Section 3B, Sub 2 of the Act authorizes targeted duties matching unfair practices by foreign countries, a practice which helped to reduce some of America's trade deficits in 2017 after President Trump took decisive action. Now, back to the present. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, speaking after Trump announced the 90-day pause, said, and I quote, "We saw the successful negotiating strategy that President Trump implemented a week ago today. It has brought more than 75 countries forward to negotiate. As I told everyone a week ago, do not retaliate and you will be rewarded. Every country who wants to come and negotiate, we are willing to hear you." End of quote. Bessent added, and I quote, "This was President Trump's strategy all along. It was a hard message. Don't retaliate. Things will turn out well." End of quote. Now, speaking at a Republican congressional dinner on April 8, President Trump said, and I quote, "I'm proud to be the president for the workers, not the outsourcers. The president who stands up for Main Street, meaning the common man, small and medium-sized enterprises and so on, not Wall Street, meaning the big financial institutions and corporations, who protects the middle class, not the political class, and who defends America, not trade cheaters all over the globe." End of quote. That is why Mark Rowan, one of America's leading asset management CEOs, speaking recently in support of the tariffs, said, and I quote, "We needed to reset our trade policy. The U.S. is the second freest trading market in the world financially after Japan, and it is the freest trading market in the world considering non-tariff barriers. Why is that written in stone? The policies that have been in place since the end of World War II are not fit for today." End of quote. And yes, the United States has, for example, imposed zero tariffs on Europe to help them recover from the devastation of World War II. Indeed, the U.S. last had a global trade surplus in 1975. That's 50 years ago. In other words, the United States has practically been subsidizing the world for half a century. So how is the implementation of President Trump's new tariff policy going in terms of his desire to use it to boost American manufacturing, for example? Well, on April 14, NVIDIA, the world's most valuable company, which manufactures AI chips, announced plans to manufacture AI supercomputer chips and servers worth up to $500 billion entirely in the United States over the next 4 years. Prior to that, and soon after Trump said in January, shortly after taking office, that the tariffs were coming, he announced a similar $500 billion investment in AI infrastructure led by OpenAI, the company behind ChatGPT and others. Then on February 24, Apple announced a $500 billion plan for new manufacturing facilities in what is its largest ever spend commitment. Likewise, on March 3, the world's most valuable semiconductor manufacturer, TSMC of Taiwan, announced plans to make a fresh $100 billion investment in the US, including building 5 additional plants. Then on March 2021, Johnson & Johnson, one of the world's largest pharmaceutical and medical technology companies, announced a new $55 billion investment in manufacturing and R&D. In addition, on March 24, South Korean carmaker Hyundai announced a $21 billion investment in the US. In a similar vein, on April 8 and 16, Japanese car makers Nissan and Honda respectively said they will transfer some of their Japanese production to the United States. There are many other cases, but the big name examples mentioned here clearly indicates that the policy is working exactly as planned. President Trump's 90-day pause is also going pretty well in terms of giving dozens of countries a great window of opportunity to negotiate win-win trade deals with the United States. On April 16, for example, Trump posted on social media, and I quote, "Japan is coming to negotiate tariffs and trade. I will attend a meeting along with the Treasury and Commerce secretaries. Hopefully something can be worked out which is good for Japan and the United States." End of quote. There will be more of such meetings with serious-minded and pragmatic countries in the roughly remaining 80 days of the negotiation window. But knowing how Trump has demonstrated flexibility in such issues, he will likely extend the pause to give more time to accommodate even more countries. Meantime, while watching the reactions to the tariffs by some Nigerian pundits, a particular April 7 segment on Arise TV caught my attention. Arise TV's Ruben Abati, who was President Goodluck Jonathan's spokesman, argued for retaliation from the Nigerian government. In hindsight, of course, and given the ongoing pause for countries that didn't retaliate, that would have been a very foolish move to make. Any country fighting with the United States over trade will lose ultimately, because with over 34% of global consumption, the United States is the world's biggest client. Rufai Oseni, this guy with his acute case of pro-Democrat Trump derangement syndrome, misguidedly condemned Trump's tariffs as some huge economic miscalculation, forgetting that even the Democrats he supports have always advocated for the very same policy. Thankfully, Vimbai Mutinhiri, the third panelist on that Arise TV program, saved the day with her brilliant analysis. She said, and I quote, "President Trump's tariff action is a welcome development for the global South. What we're seeing is the dismantling of what is known as the Washington Consensus. This is what America has led for so long. This has caused underdevelopment in several developing countries because we are stuck in the perpetual global order where we are always selling off our raw materials." End of quote. Talking about specifics, Vimbai went on, and I quote, "Trump has made it clear that oil and gas are exempt from these tariffs. So that means that Nigeria largely goes scot-free." End of quote. Because, of course, more than 90% of our exports to the US are oil and gas. But Vimbai was not done. She mentioned that because Nigeria's other exports to the US, like cocoa and cashew nuts, are things the US doesn't produce, that is a great opportunity for negotiations with the United States. Vimbai also advised that Nigeria can turn to other countries like Pakistan that were hit with much higher tariffs originally than Nigeria's comparatively low 14%, and invite them to invest in Nigeria and export from Nigeria to the US, which will be cheaper than exporting from their home countries. Vimbai was spot on, and one of Trump's top advisors, Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller, said the same thing in an X post, and I quote, "President Trump's master strategy, bold statesmanship, and brilliant tactical planning has done more to reform broken international trade in days than anyone has achieved in decades." End of quote. Indeed, recognizing that fact, Peter Obi, speaking at the Commonwealth Trade and Investment Council in the UK on April 8, said, and I quote, "The recent interventions of President Trump have disrupted some of the settled assumptions of the global economy. While Africa did not witness a similar economic transformation under Globalization 2.0, we need to rise up and take the right actions to ensure that we can profit from whatever trading system will arise in the wake of the second Trump presidency." End of quote. Talking about negotiating with the Americans, as Vimbai stated, on April 7, the United States Trade Representative posted a series of 10 posts on X, titled "Spotlighting Another 10 Unfair Trade Practices Faced by American Exporters." After mentions of China, India, Angola, Japan, the EU, South America, Algeria, and Kenya, the list was rounded up by Nigeria. The post about Nigeria read, and I quote, "Nigeria's import ban on 25 different product categories impacts US exporters, particularly in agriculture, pharmaceuticals, beverages, and consumer goods. Restrictions on items like beef, pork, poultry, food juices, medicaments, and spirits limit US market access and reduce export opportunities. These policies create significant trade barriers that lead to lost revenue for US businesses looking to expand in the Nigerian market." End of quote. If true, our Nigerian Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment should find similar trade barrier loopholes in the United States market and use them in their negotiations. That's just how these things work. The pursuit of national interests and reciprocity are foundational principles of international relations and international trade. Now, going by the statement made by Dr. Jumoke Oduwole, the Minister of Industry, Trade and Investment, the previous day, April 6, especially her point about talking with the World Trade Organization, WTO, about this issue, it is clear that the federal government will be better advised to follow Vimbai Mutinhiri and Peter Obi's informed perspectives on the issue. But yes, Dr. Duwole was right that Nigeria, like other African countries, also needs to increase its intra-African trade numbers, building on the African Continental Free Trade Area after. I also read on April 16 that the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria said President Trump's 14% tariffs will result in a loss of between 1 trillion and 2 trillion naira from Nigeria's agricultural exports. The first problem with that is that they need to update themselves, because on April 9, President Trump announced a 90-day pause on all new tariffs and only kept tariffs at 10% for all countries except China. The second thing is that the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria ought to be putting pressure on Bola Tinubu and his government to use this 90-day window of opportunity to hold negotiations on a trade deal with the United States. Thankfully, on April 10, a day after President Trump announced a 90-day pause, Tinubu met with Mr. Massad Boulos, Trump's senior advisor for Africa, in Paris, France, which has now become his second home, as I explained in a recent video. Boulos said Trump wants to expand American investment in Nigeria. And so it's simple. Tinubu should give him that and demand for more Nigerian access to the American market in return. Now, back to China, because by and large, China is, and rightly so, the number one target of President Trump's new tariff policy. Trump is bent on reducing America's large trade deficit with China. He also wants China to take concrete action on Chinese theft of U.S. companies' intellectual property and make Sino-American trade more competitive by reducing Chinese government subsidies for Chinese companies. The United States is not alone regarding these concerns. Speaking at the India Global Forum on April 8, India's Commerce Minister echoed the US's sentiments of Chinese trade manipulation. And of course, India and others will benefit from a departure of American and other foreign companies from China. It's thus in China's interests to make a deal with the United States as soon as possible. China clearly has much more to lose from a fractured trade relationship with the United States. China, if you're listening, this is not the time for whipping up nationalist sentiment. This is the time for demonstrating pragmatic leadership. In that respect, I totally agree with the views of prominent US hedge fund manager Bill Ackman expressed on X on April 9. Referring to China, Ackman posted, and I quote, "Pick up the phone and call President Trump. He's a tough but fair negotiator. The longer China holds out and it retaliates, the worse the outcome for China." End of quote. Ackman added, and I quote, "Time is not China's friend. Every US company that sources products in China is in the process of finding alternative suppliers. Supply chains are time consuming and can be expensive to move. Once moved, they are sticky." End of quote. We have already seen the Chinese stock market plummet. US imports from China are dropping as I speak. There are and will continue to be many layoffs as companies try to balance the books and survive the trade war. In 2020 and 2021, thanks to the phase one of the trade deal that Trump signed with China in his first term, China proved that they can indeed buy more American goods, as President Trump has always wanted. More importantly, China needs to walk its talk of deepening reform and opening up to foreign investment. For one, as a top priority, China must offer stronger protections for foreign intellectual property. Intellectual property theft is egregious and must be criminalized. Now, my fellow Nigerians, the bilateral and other trade agreements with the United States that come out of this process will shape global trade for the foreseeable future. That is why, as governments and other stakeholders are making the necessary negotiations, the rest of us need to stay informed about the developments and ultimately trade agreements that will be reached. Thanks for listening. May God bless the Federal Republic of Nigeria.